Catus, Maximus here. This time a little review of this performance tool, Zerk fitting cleaning tool. It's Chinese made, which is unfortunate. It's a real simple device. It is all steel and it's actually made out of 4 parts. We have a plunger that's press fit into this back handle here. And then we have just a nose. This unscrews, and inside there, I don't think you can see it, but there is a plunger. It's a pretty tight fit. So all this is a piston. And the idea, what they're quoting, is that you'd fill it up with grease, or you put it in some grease and oil, suck it back, put it over the end of a grease fitting. Like one we have here, you just put the tip of it over the top of the grease fitting, and then hit this with a hammer, attempt to use it to blast away grit and debris, as well as loosen up the check ball that prevents debris from getting inside it, although this one's already had issues with its check ball. Now, the obvious issues with using a tool like this is only some grease fittings are straight. Many are at various different angles. And if you use a tool like this, a steel tool, and you hammer it, you're very likely to actually break the grease fitting off. So you're better just using a solvent and a rag to try to clean it up, and then some tool to attempt to blast it away. I think this would be better suited for, let me get a little less zoom here. This would be better suited for stuck grease fittings or jammed grease fittings, where you actually need an impact where you put on the grease gun and you just can't get the grease to flow. This may help. That and the fact there's so many situations where you're not going to be able to get a tool this long, which is going to be almost 6 inches long, plus be able to have a hammer to swing against it. So I think it's a kind of an interesting idea, but it's basically a misplaced idea, or not as good as you think it is when you actually look at all the crazy places that grease fittings are. However, there is one little saving grace, I think, to this, besides the fact, and that isn't the fact that putting this over a dirty grease fitting is likely to blow a bunch of dirt into the grease fitting, is the fact that they did, interestingly enough, even though it's straight threads, they are the same pitch and diameter as actual grease gun hoses. So I have a grease gun hose here, and I thought, this thing could be particularly useful in the situation of jammed grease fittings, because we can see here, I can get this to thread onto the this hose quite nicely, and it does still work properly. Then you might use something such as this locking grease adapter. And with this combination here, the locking adapter and this hammer tool, you get a little bit more flexibility off the hose. I'm using, this Flexzilla 10,000 PSI, so it should be pretty rigid, so the hose won't expand when you hit it. Then this tool's away from the grease fitting, so you're not actually impacting directly on the grease fitting, and you're able to get into a position to where you can hit it with a hammer. And this may actually be useful for stuck grease fittings. If they're old, then that little check ball will get rusted into the top of the grease fitting. Sometimes they just are terribly stuck. So something like this with the locking adapter, you can put that on there, suck in some grease, and hammer it a few times or a few repeated cycles, and be able to actually clear up a totally jammed Zerk fitting that you'd end up having to try to, remove and replace. So that's why when I noticed that, I thought, well, it could be a bit more useful in this specific application where you attach a hose to it. Not so much the direct action. There you go. That got a little bit stuck. Not so much the direct hitting against the grease fitting with this little nipple. Another problem with this little nipple is it's just a steel nipple, and if there's any dings or anything on that grease fitting, then the grease is just going to shoot around it and really not do so much. So anyway, that's my opinion of this little grease gun, grease fitting, Zerk fitting cleaning tool. And I think with a hose and a locking adapter, it definitely could have some merit. But in its current situation, I think it's going to cause as much harm as it does good. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing and commenting. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.